Custom Menu D, display menu. HDMI, I'm not sending an HDMI signal out from my camera, but I leave it on 1080i out. These are kind of the defaults, and HDMI control to off. Again, just not using that. And same thing with video out. My default is NTSC. If you're in North America, that's probably you as well. Europe, you're probably PAL, or some other regions in the world. Again, I'm leaving my default for where I am. Play control settings. So a lot of cool stuff in here. You can decide, once you go in these, what menus you want active. So I go through and I'm only turning on Live SCP on all of these. Live SCP. On Art menu, I leave it on Art, and you can also leave it on both of these. That lets you switch back and forth between them. I don't actually use the Art mode screen, so I just leave the Art menu on. Same thing with scenes. This is the most important right here. Live Super Control Panel. Make sure that's checked. Live Control makes it look like a consumer pocket camera. I turn that off. This is all you need right here. Make sure that's checked. Going back out. Play info settings. This shows you when you're in your playback mode and you hit the info button, what different ways do you see your image played back? So play info, image only, overall, if you want to see a histogram, highlights and shadows, or lightbox where you can compare two images. If you want, you pick them based on your preference. If you want to see a histogram as you scroll the info button, I have just these two checked. Live view info. So image only, I leave that checked. Custom 1 and Custom 2. So these are 3 custom views you can scroll through plus your main view, which is 4. When you hit the info button during live view, it'll rotate through these. So Custom 1, when you go into it, you can have the option of seeing a histogram, highlights and shadows light up, and your level gauge. I have highlights and shadows in one menu, and in my Custom 2, I have the other 2. I like to see these 2 together, and on the other one, just the 1. If you like to see kind of everything, you can select all 3 and just have one custom menu selected and just turn the other one off. And then when you hit the info button during live view, you can bounce back and forth just between a full view with seeing a histogram, your highlights, and a level, and then going back to just the plain image. I like to split those up a little bit. So then the next settings is when you're in play mode and you zoom out, and you zoom out once more past the full image, you can see an array of images. I have mine set to a 4x4 grid and a 25 grid. You can do 100, you can do a 9 grid, or you can do a calendar view. I prefer 4 and 25. That seems pretty quick to scroll through images. Displayed grid during your live view. You can turn this off. You can do big grid, 3x3. This is kind of like rule of thirds, kind of like a measurement kind of grid, an X. Different preferences, depending which way you like it. I like the 3x3. I leave that on. Picture mode settings. This is where you can see a listing of all the different picture modes and see them checked by default. As you uncheck them, they become unavailable to select in the shooting modes. This is convenient if there's just a couple modes you like to use, for example, monotone, muted and portrait, and maybe vintage or pinhole, for example, and you don't want to sit and scroll through all the other ones. You can uncheck all the ones you don't use, and it becomes a lot quicker to get to the ones you do use. That's about all this does. I leave it checked by default. I don't use them very often. Your preferences may vary. Histogram settings. This is set to 255 and 0 by default. This indicates what level your highlight and shadow warnings will show up if you have that selected in your view mode. So this will tell you when your highlights clip. Right now, mine is set to 255. That's pure white. Anything that exceeds that will show me a highlight warning, and same with shadows hitting 0. You can adjust this if you want it to give you a heads up prior to hitting those extreme levels. I shoot RAW, so I know even when this is showing me 255 and 0, it's pretty much taking it from a JPEG rendering. And so when I see the highlights clipping, if I see just minimal highlight clipping, I can usually reduce that in RAW to be non-existent. Where if I see about 10-15% in highlight, I know I need to back my exposure down a little bit if I want to preserve those. So I leave this at 255 and 0. Again, it's preference. Some people like to be warned a little sooner of those highlights, so you might do 250, for example. Know that 255 is pure white and 0 is pure black. So this is page 2 of Menu D. Mode guide, I keep off. Live view boost. For bulb time, I keep it on 2 when I'm doing astrophotography. When I'm not, I usually just keep it on 1. I keep it off on everything else. Usually now, if I need the live boost, I just turn on the simulated OVF option. Frame rate. This is frame rate will be grayed out if you're using focus peaking. So if you have focus peaking turned on or set to a custom function, this will not be available to you. I keep focus peaking off so I can go into frame rate and select high. Makes the viewfinder look a little smoother in my opinion. Art live view mode. It's how do you view the art filters when you see them while you're shooting. Mode 2 kind of reduces them. I keep it on mode 2. Again, I don't use art filters too much. Flicker reduction, I just leave on auto. Live view close-up mode, I use mode 2. Depth of field lock, I keep that off. Okay, page 3. Peaking settings. Personally, if you're going to use peaking, which I don't, so I can use the high frame rate, peaking color I think is best on red. To me, that's the most visible color. I've been fine with normal intensity. Your experimenting with it may vary. And image brightness adjustment, I leave that on. Backlit LCD, I keep this at 8 seconds. I use the shortest, so I conserve battery. Sleep, again, 1 minute. I'd rather have the camera go to sleep and conserve battery than just leave it running. Auto power off, I have it 5 minutes. Again, depending what you prefer, set it there. The sound, I usually keep it off. USB mode is on auto. If you leave it on auto, when you do plug in, the camera will give you the option of selecting one of these at that time. And I prefer that because sometimes I go in as a tethered shooting, and other times I'm connecting with storage to do a firmware update, for example. So I'd rather choose when I'm actually using it. So go ahead and leave that on auto. Menu recall. I like this new option. Menu, I leave on recall instead of reset, and this allows me to come back to the same menu position when I press the menu button again. It brings us right back to the same place instead of restarting. So that was Menu D.